Hello! Welcome. Hey, what the heck? That's weird. Hello. For some reason the multi-stream is not showing the chat. Let's see here what we've got going on. Alright. Let me fix something real quick. Gotta hop over here. Hopefully everybody's doing well. There we go. I gotta change the size of it. So today we will be continuing Heaven Official's Blessing. If you don't know what that is, it is a Chinese web novel. Incredibly well written, lovely universe of fantasy and monsters and magic. A lot of really cool stuff. Hey, Helena. Hello, Anime Best, Billy, Pablo, Ming Ming, Anime. Yep, okay. Gonna try and fix the chat box. I think it's good now. Yep, okay, it's good. Is it at the right height? Oh, wait, what? Why is it doubled up? Ah, boy. Oh, sounds like my groceries might be here. I've been, as y'all know, there it is, okay. I have been changing the setup, and this is the first time I've used the reading setup, and it was a little off, but I think it's right now, so there we go. Thanks for joining me. I do have to put the new image that I had that apparently didn't show. Let's try this again. It's not a stream if there isn't a problem, right? Hopefully by the end of the week, most of the issues will be smoothed out, you know. Let's see what we want to look at today. We'll do that one. It's pretty. Oh, geez. Oh, no. Why does it always do that? I don't want it to be that big. That's wild. It's also not the right proportions. God, this friggin'. Okay. Well. How's everybody doing? I'm doing okay. I'm gonna check my little phone message thing that just popped up and see if that's my groceries. Nope, she's on her way. Okay. So we're continuing with chapter 25 today. Last time we stopped with the main characters are in this ancient kingdom that was destroyed hundreds of years ago. And everybody who travels through the desert nearby keeps disappearing. There's all these bad stories of people disappearing. So they're investigating to figure out what's going on. Our hero is Xie Lian, the guy in the white. He is a god of bad luck. His life has sucked, basically, but he's trying to turn things around. He has two little demigods helping him out, and San Lang in the red, who's a mysterious young man who kind of just appeared out of nowhere to help out, and everybody's a little suspicious about who he is and where he came from. Well, last chapter, Xie Lian fell from a deadly height and was going to be in trouble when San Lang leapt to the rescue and revealed himself finally to save him. So now we're going to see what he really is, who he really is, because he revealed his true form to save his beloved Xie Lian. This is a love story between two dudes. One's a ghost and one's a god, you know how it is. So this is Heaven Official's Blessing, Chapter 25. Hello, Darkspark. Welcome. Alright, let me pull up Chapter 25, and we will get started. Oh, another problem we have right now. Let me add the music before I forget. Let's see here. What did we use last time? I do not know which one's which. We're just going to use that one. Oh, geez, that's probably very loud. There we go, that's better. How's that sound? Let me know if that's too loud or what have you. And we'll start. Chapter 25. Sun Long, are you alright? Put me down, Xie Lian said. No, Sun Long replied. Xie Lian was taken aback by the response. What's going on? Was there something on the ground? The pair of arms was still holding him tightly, without any intention of letting go. Xie Lian was going to raise his hand and gently push himself away, but as he laid his hand on San Long's chest, he abruptly remembered how he had just been touching him all over, even feeling up his neck, and quietly withdrew his hand again. It had been hundreds of years since the last time Xie Lian cared about what was awkward, but now there was a voice in his head telling him he better stay still and decent. Just then, an enraged, sorrowful wail roared from the other side of the pit. A voice cried, "What happened to you?" Those words were shouted in the Banyu language, and hearing the voice, it was General Mo that Xie Lian had dragged down with him. Since he was already dead, the fall wouldn't have killed him, only blasting a human crater in the ground when he crashed. But when he climbed up from his hole, he started screaming, "What's going on? My brothers, what's happened to you?" When he howled into the pit earlier from the top of the wall, there were hundreds and thousands of voices that answered his call, as if the pit was filled to the brim with angry, menacing ghosts. But right then, other than Mo's cries, Xie Lian could only hear dead silence. There wasn't any sound of breathing or a heartbeat, other from San Long, who was next to him. Oh, it wasn't even from San Long, who was next to him. Xie Lian's breathing hitched, suddenly realizing what was amiss. That's right, even though Xie Lian was pressed against San Long, he couldn't detect any sound of his heart beating or his breathing. Mo roared, "Who killed you? Who killed all of you?" When Azao first fell, there were horrifying sounds of flesh being ripped apart, but after San Long jumped, there were no more sounds. Who else could it be? Mo seemed to have realized this and shouted towards them, "Killing my soldiers! You're dead! I'm gonna kill you!" Although he couldn't see, Xie Lian could still sense danger rapidly approaching and jerked his body. "San Long, watch out!" Don't worry about him," San Long said, still holding him tight. He made a small sidestep and spun around. In the dark, Xie Lian heard a series of broken clanking sounds, clear and intense, swishing here and there. Mo rushed to capture them but missed the first time, and turned around to attack again. San Long easily sidestepped again and avoided him. Xie Lian's arms involuntarily climbed up San Long's chest once more, and held on tight to his shoulders, unconsciously clutching at his clothes. But the arms carrying him were steady. Even with all the spinning and sidestepping, the hold was strong and secure. Xie Lian could feel something cold and hard on those arms that would poke him every so often, and was a little confused. In the endless blackness, streaks of shimmering silver flashed everywhere, and sounds of a sharp metal inflicting wounds were accompanied by Mo's roars. It was obvious the Banyu general was heavily wounded now, but as tough as he was, he refused to admit defeat, and once again rushed towards them. Xie Lian called out, "Ruoi!" The silk band answered his call and shot out. A loud snap sounded in the air, and Mo seemed to have fallen over from getting smacked by Ruoi. Mo shouted from the ground, "You two! 2 against 1? Unfair!" You were gonna kill us. Who cares if it's 2 against 1, or if it's fair or unfair? Saving my life is more important. I'll kill you dead first, Xie Lian thought. San Long, on the other hand, only sneered. Even one-on-one you won't win. You don't have to fight. The last line was directed to Xie Lian, and the words had none of the gib mocking tone. Hello, Zaoya. I hope I said that right. Thanks for joining us. All right, Xie Lian responded, but also prompted him. San Long, why don't you put me down? I'll be in your way like this. You're not in the way. Don't come down, San Long said. Why can't I come down? Xie Lian asked curiously. This guy couldn't possibly enjoy fighting while carrying someone. San Long's answer only had 2 words. It's dirty. Xie Lian had never imagined that to be the answer. And such seriousness, too. He thought it was kind of funny, but it also made him feel kind of strange. The feeling was hard to describe, but his heart was unmistakably warmed. You can't possibly keep holding me like this. I could, San Long replied. Xie Lian was only joking, but San Long's words had no trace of half-heartedness, and suddenly Xie Lian didn't know what to say. In the time they were talking, Keimo had never ceased to attack. Both of San Long's hands were firmly holding him, but something else was keeping Keimo at bay, whipping at him to defeat. He shouted while slowly backing away. That bitch made you too. He hadn't finished his words before a large boom sounded off and the massive man fell to the ground, no longer able to stand. Xie Lian heard these said, San Long, don't kill him. We'll still need to question him if we want to get out of here. San Long heeded his words and stopped. I wasn't planning on killing him anyway, otherwise he wouldn't have lasted till now. Dead silence returned anew to the sinner's pit. After a moment, Xie Lian asked, San Long, did you do all of this down here? Even if nothing was visible in the dark, with such an overpowering stench of blood, such an aura of bloodlust, plus the enraged madness of Keimo, it was obvious what had happened down here. There was another momentary silence before Xie Lian heard San Long's response. Yes, he said. It was an unexpected answer. Xie Lian sighed. How should I say this? Xie Lian chewed on his words and organized his thoughts before continuing in a serious tone. San Long, next time you see a pit like this, don't just jump in randomly. I couldn't even stop you. Really, I didn't know what to do. San Long didn't seem to expect this kind of response and let out a confused, eh? When he spoke again, he sounded a bit odd. You don't want to ask anything else? What else do you want me to ask? Xie Lian said. For example, whether I'm human, San Long replied. Xie Lian rubbed his forehead. I don't think that's necessary. Is it not? Is it? It's not important whether you're human or not, Xie Lian said. Oh? Xie Lian crossed his arms while in San Long's arms and said, relationships should depend on chance and whether we're on the same wavelength, not on identity. If I like you, you can be a beggar and I'll still like you. If I dislike you, you can be the emperor and I'll still dislike you. Shouldn't it be like that? It's simple logic. So whether you're human or not is irrelevant. San Long laughed out loud. You're very right. Right? Xie Lian said, laughing along too. But the more he laughed, the more he felt something was off, and it came to him suddenly. He was still letting San Long carry him, and the scary thing was, he'd gotten used to the position without realizing it. What kind of situation was this? Xie Lian cleared his throat quietly and said, San Long, we can talk about that later. How about you put me down first? San Long seemed to have chuckled and said, hold on. He carried Xie Lian and walked on for a bit before gently letting him down. Touching down, Xie Lian could feel hard, flat ground. Thanks. San Long made no gesture in response, and after thanking him, Xie Lian looked to the sky. Oh, they're so cute, aren't they? And hello, Daniel, and the folks that have joined us. We're gonna have to take a quick break because my groceries are on the front porch. Gotta go grab those, and then we'll continue. So be right back. to the story. Above them, the navy blue sky hung a crescent moon, bright and beautiful. Just that watching the view from a square frame made it feel like one was a frog in a well. Xie Lian commanded Roy to try and reach for the top, but as expected, it stopped halfway as if it bumped into an invisible wall. Roy rebounded, unable to go higher. Hello, Wiley, and hey, Phil, welcome. Let's see here. There's an array drawn around the sinner's pit, San Long said. I know, but I wanted to try anyway, Xie Lian said. I can't give up until I've tried, you know. I wonder how the others are up there. Would the girl in black have swept them down? He retold how the girl hung on the pole suddenly came alive and swept all the Banyu soldiers down into the pit to San Long. While talking, he stepped on something on the ground, appearing to be an arm, and Xie Lian almost tripped. He steadied himself immediately, but San Long still reached out and helped to support him, chiding, "Be careful." I told you the ground was dirty, San Long added nonchalantly. Xie Lian now understood what dirty meant, and said, Don't worry, I want to ignite a palm torch, see what's happened down here, and go from there. San Long didn't say anything. Just then, from afar, Keimo's cold voice cried out again. You two doing the deeds of that bitch. All the thousands of dead souls of this kingdom will curse you. Curse you! Xie Lian turned towards Keimo and asked, using the Banyu language, General Keimo, who is that person you speak of? Keimo responded with hatred. Why pretend to ask? That wicked witch! Is it the woman cultivator roaming the city streets? Keimo spat angrily on the ground, and Xie Lian took that as a yes. He continued to question, Weren't you a loyal supporter of the Banyu Grand Tutor? Keimo was provoked by his words and said, I, Keimo, will never again be loyal to her. I will never forgive that bitch. Afterwards, he started uttering a string of curses, inflamed and hysterical, his words rapid and incomprehensible, and Xie Lian blanked, unable to follow. He looked to San Long and quietly called, San Long? San Long translated, He's cursing. He said the woman betrayed his country, opened the fortress gates, and let in the Yong'an army to slaughter the city. She's got the blood of her people on her hands, and of his brothers, whom she pushed into this pit. He will hang her dead 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Wait, hold on, Xie Lian quickly exclaimed. Hey, Jeff, welcome. How could this be? These were two things that didn't match. First, the woman cultivator roaming in the city streets Xie Lian spoke of earlier was supposed to be the lady in white. But now, Keimo continuously called the Banyu Grand Tutor bitch, saying she pushed his soldiers into the pit. But earlier, the black-clad girl swept the soldiers into the pit. Keimo cursed her as the same thing. Plus the last bit, to hang her dead 1,000 times. Xie Lian suddenly realized they couldn't be talking about the same person. Hey, Jessica. Oh, man, you can't... No! How could you? I guess I'm glad that you liked the story. Second, it was the Banyu Grand Tutor who betrayed the kingdom of Banyu? Xie Lian interrupted Keimo. General, the Banyu Grand Tutor you speak of, was it the girl on the black pole hung above the sinner's pit? Who else could it be if not her? Keimo shouted. The scrawny, corpse-like little girl in black was the real tutor of Banyu? But if that was the case, who was the cultivator and her black-clad companion strolling through the streets looking to kill them? The girl in black obviously had unmeasurable powers and could easily sweep dozens of hostile soldiers off the wall. So why was she hung above the sinner's pit? Chapter 26, Sinner's Pit Part 3. The story was getting more complex and convoluted, Xie Lian thought. He asked, General, I want to ask. Don't ask any more, Keimo interrupted. You killed my soldiers. What more would you want to know? I won't answer. Now fight me. I killed them. He didn't do anything, San Long said. You can answer his questions and fight me. Well, that was irrefutable logic. Kamo yelled angrily, "You're both taking orders from her. There's no difference." Xie Lian immediately said, "General Kamo, I think you're mistaken. We've traveled across the desert to get rid of the Grand Tutor of Banyu. How can we be the helper she sent for?" Hearing that Xie Lian was actually there to destroy the tutor, Kamo fell silent. He then asked, "If you weren't helping her, then why did you kill my soldiers?" Xie Lian explained, "Isn't it because you were throwing us into the pit and we had to defend ourselves?" Kamo yelled angrily, "Nonsense! I didn't throw a single one of you! I even caught you! You all jumped down yourselves!" Yes, we were jumping into the pit ourselves. General, we're all trapped at the bottom of the pit now. Let's just call a truce, all right? Why did the Banyu tutor open the fortress gates to let the enemies in? As if Kamo would listen to reason, he said, unrelenting, "The two of you are sly and unjust, fighting me 2-on-1. Xie Lian felt a little exasperated. "I only smacked you once. I didn't do much." He didn't mind being called sly or unjust. If the situation called for it, never mind 2-on-1, he would bring 100 to beat down one. Who cared about 1-on-1? But earlier, Sun Long obviously had the upper hand, even while carrying him, and told Xie Lian not to fight. Kamo seemed to think he could have won if it had just been him and Sun Long, and Xie Lian felt bad for him. He knows his boy would win. Kamo was incredibly uncooperative, but Xie Lian wasn't worried. Kamo seemed to be the type that could easily be made to spill the beans, and they had time, not a problem. Sun Long, on the other hand, didn't have the same patience. He lazily said, "You better answer the questions for the sake of your soldiers." "You already killed them," Kamo said. "It's pointless using them to threaten me." "They are dead, but their corpses are still around," Sun Long replied. Kamo became alarmed, unable to remain sprawled on the ground anymore. "What are you going to do?" Sun Long smirked. "That depends on what you want to do." Just by his voice, Xie Lian could imagine Sun Long arching his eyebrow. "Do you want their next lives to be fortuitous, or to be reborn as a pool of blood?" Kamo stopped, but soon understood what Sun Long meant and exploded. "You!" The people of Banyu took deaths and funerals extremely seriously. They believed that however the deceased looked at the time of their death was how they would be reborn. For instance, if the deceased was missing an arm, they would be reborn handicapped. If the corpses in the pit were destroyed, what would their rebirths be like? General Kamo was a purebred Banyu citizen and couldn't help but be afraid. As expected, on the other side of the dark pit, Kamo gritted his teeth soundly in rage, but finally relented helplessly. "Don't touch their bodies. They were good, brave soldiers. It was already a tragedy to be trapped in the pit for so many years. I don't know if being killed by you is a blessing or not, but I won't have their corpses be humiliated." He paused and asked, "Are you really here to kill Banyu?" Xie Lian replied warmly, "That is no lie. The more we know, the more chance we'll have of winning. Not much is known about the Banyu tutor on the outside. We have no idea how to fight her. But you've worked under her in the past. Perhaps you can enlighten some things for us." Maybe it was because they shared the same enemy that a sort of bond was developed. Or perhaps in this inescapable chasm atop the dead bodies of his soldiers, Kamo became disheartened. Whatever the case may be, the general lost the will to attack them. "You don't know why she opened the gates? Because she's against us! She hates us! She hates the kingdom of Banyu!" "What do you mean she hates the kingdom of Banyu? Isn't Banyu Grand Tutor a citizen of Banyu?" Xie Lian asked. "Yes, but not entirely," Kamo replied. "She's of mixed blood. The other half is Yong'an." Ah. As it turned out, the Banyu Grand Tutor was born of a Banyu woman and a Yong'an man. Living on the border with endless hatred and skirmishes, things were difficult, and the Yong'an man finally had enough and moved away, back to Yong'an. Although it was an amicable divorce, the Banyu woman soon passed away from heartache. They left behind a child of 6 to 7 years in age, without any guardians. The child wandered the streets, hungry and desperate. The couple had received cold shoulders everywhere they went, and now their daughter, too, received contempt. The people of Banyu were tall and brawny and saw beauty in strength and liveliness. But this girl was born of mixed blood and appeared small and scrawny among the Banyu children. She grew up being bullied and became more and more sullen. The Banyu children wouldn't play with her, but there were some Yong'an children who did pay attention to her. When this little mixed-blood girl was about 10, a riot broke out and the two armies fought. The battle took many lives, and afterwards, the little mixed-blood girl disappeared. She had neither friends nor family in Banyu, so no one noticed or cared when she vanished. The next time she appeared was a different story. In those years, she walked thousands of miles and crossed the Gobi Desert to Yong'an. No one knew what kind of encounters she had, but she returned having learned black magic and could control the venomous creatures most feared by the citizens of Banyu, the scorpion snakes. Upon her return, though many were impressed, many were also afraid. That was because the girl's personality never changed, still gloomy and unsociable. There were also many who bullied her in the past. If she were to enter the palace and become a high-ranking official, wouldn't she one day seek revenge against them? I'm sure there were many who spoke poorly of her, Xie Lian commented. Keimo humphed. Not just slander. They went to the palace directly to advise the king, saying she was an evil messenger from the Scorpion Snake clan, here to bring ruin to the kingdom of Banyu. But none of them succeeded. Xie Lian guessed. Did she rush to have those people hung first? Keimo was even more disgusted. You, man of Yong'an, why is your mind so full of depraved and vile developments? It was none of that. I protected her. Xie Lian was exasperated. I already said I'm not from Yong'an. Whatever. At the time, Keimo was already a distinguished, fierce warrior. There was a time that he took his troops out to annihilate the nest of a band of desert bandits and brought the girl who was the palace sorceress along. The band of bandits was strong, building their nest below the sands. In the battle, both sides suffered casualties, and while Keimo stole the victory, the battle caused the nest below the sands to collapse. With this and the coming of windstorms, they couldn't stay. Keimo took a number of soldiers to retreat, but the other group, included the sorceress, wasn't able to escape. Once they retreated to the safe point and waited out the sandstorm, Keimo returned anew, hoping to dig out the soldiers to bury them properly. Yet who knew that when he got there, he found the sorceress had, by her powers alone, dug out a sizable hole and managed to drag all the surviving wounded soldiers to hide away from the winds. All the bodies of the dead were dug out too and laid in a neat order. She had done all this herself, and when they got there, the sorceress's body was covered in blood, but was still guarding the entrance to the hole silently, hugging her knees, waiting for them like a small lone wolf. After that incident, I thought she was a good woman who did the right thing, Keimo said. I believed she'd never had the intention to harm the kingdom of Banyu, so I became her guarantor with all my might and fought back against those malicious voices. In addition, Keimo himself grew up bullied and could understand her strife, so naturally he paid more attention to her. The more attention he paid, the more he realized how powerful this girl was, and endorsed her all the way, helping her reach the position of Banyu Grand Tutor, and become what was later recorded as the most loyal supporter of the tutor. This lasted until another war broke out, and the kingdom of Yong'an sent armies to annihilate the kingdom of Banyu. With the two armies clashing and at a lengthy standstill, she conducted a grand ceremony to pray to the heavens, saying it was to bring blessings unto us Banyu soldiers. Thus, the soldiers' will to kill exploded. Their battle spirits significantly raised. They defended the fortress gates to the death. There were arrows, giant boulders, boiling oil, swords and blades. The slaughtering was incessantly great. Yet unexpectedly, just as the fighting was at its height, the tutor appeared and opened the fortress gates. With the gates open, millions of enemy troops swarmed into the city like mad. After the trampling of iron steeds, the entire fortress city instantly became a ritual of blood. Keimo, who was fighting hard against the enemies, went mad with rage when he heard the Grand Tutor had opened the gates. But no matter how tough he was, one could not win alone against so many. Keimo gritted his teeth. I only learned that she had long since colluded with the enemy and agreed to let them in that moment. But even if I was destined to die in battle, before I died I was going to kill that traitor no matter what. So I sent a troop of soldiers to charge up the fortress tower, and we dragged her down, hanging her dead over the sinner's pit, hung over that pole. After the enemy troops passed, the kingdom of Banyu became a kingdom of death. The tutor and the general who died in the battle became trapped within the ruins, both watching the other in mutual grudge and hate. Xie Lian asked, "So, General K-Mo, you led the Banyu soldiers under you to search for the shadows of that tutor everywhere, and every time you capture her, you'd hang her over the sinner's pit." "It wouldn't be anything if we hung her dead 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, K-Mo exclaimed. "Because she's been apprehending all my soldiers who've turned savage and throwing them into the pit. She set up a powerful array around the pit only she can break, and once you fall, you never climb back up. And those of us who have been betrayed by her, those soldiers who died wrongfully in battle, hold a deep resentment that only devouring the flesh and blood of those from Yong'an can appease, and allow us to slowly pass from this earth with our hatred released. Otherwise, they can only howl deep into the long nights without absolution." "So is that why you keep capturing people to feed them?" Xie Lian asked. Excuse me. "What else can we do?" K-Mo replied. "Have me listen to them wail without doing anything?" "The people you threw down, did you catch them yourselves?" "We can't stray too far from the kingdom of Banyu, but thankfully her snakes like to haunt and crawl out of the ruins to bite people. Those caravans who were bitten would come into the city looking for the herb." "That mud face in the palace, was it you who buried it?" "That's right. The man buried in the earth was originally robbing riches from the palace, but all the treasures our kingdom had were cleared out by those Yong'an men 200 years ago." "Why did you bury him instead of throwing him down directly?" Xie Lian asked. "There's gotta be fertilizer to grow the ferns, after all," K-Mo replied. "Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to hold back those scorpion snakes. We don't want to run into them either." "That's not right," Xie Lian thought. If K-Mo and his party consciously knew how to grow and fertilize the plants, even going as far as using living humans as fertilizer, then it was clear that even though they were no longer alive, their fear of the scorpion snakes never lessened. If that was the case, then while they were alive, their fear must have been greater. If the Banyu Grand Tutor could control a murder weapon as great as those scorpion snakes, then why would she be so easily dragged down the fortress tower by a bunch of soldiers and be hung to death? According to K-Mo, in the past 200-some years, he'd captured the tutor over and over and hung her dead repeatedly. Either way, Xie Lian felt if it was him and he had such a killing weapon in his hands, he would never allow the enemy the chance to come near him. And that the snakes would leave the fortress to hunt was also of interest. Was it an accident? Not likely. More likely, they were purposefully trying to lure people into the pass. Was that the tutor's intentional doing? Wouldn't it only be helpful with K-Mo to catch live? Wouldn't it only be helping K-Mo catch live humans to feed his soldiers? Mutual hatred wouldn't make sense then. Were they pretending to be enemies? What was the point? And in all of this mess, there was also the mysterious lady in white and her companion. Xie Lian decided to ask more questions. "General K-Mo, when we first entered the fortress, we saw two ladies, one in black and one in white. Do you know who they are?" Before there was a response, San Long whispered, "Shh." Xie Lian didn't know what was going on, but closed his mouth immediately. A strange hunch made him look up. It was the same framed navy blue sky with a crescent moon, but next to the moon he saw a person. A black-clad silhouette peered over, looking down. After watching them for a bit, the little form suddenly grew bigger. It had jumped down. As the figure fell, Xie Lian could see that it was the Grand Tutor who had been hanging on the pole earlier. The waiting light is Fiona. Alright, let me grab. Got a little tickle. I have one of my things. We're going to read one more chapter because I really want to get to the meat of this section of story. Chapter 27. "K-Mo, what's going on?" the Grand Tutor asked in the Banyu language as she landed. The moment she spoke, Xie Lian thought her voice was very different than what he'd imagined. Although still cold, her voice was tiny, like the grumblings of a sulky child, not a voice that was cool and powerful. If not for his hearing, he might not have heard her properly. "What's going on? They're all dead!" K-Mo shouted. How did they all die? The tutor asked. Isn't it because you pushed them down and trapped them in this god-forsaken hell? Who's here? There's another person, the tutor said. At the bottom of the pit there should be 2 other people, but San Lang had neither breath nor heartbeat, so the tutor didn't detect his presence. It was also complete chaos on top of the walls earlier, and no one kept track of who fell and who ran away, so she thought there was only Xie Lian. It was them who killed all my soldiers. Are you happy now? Everyone you wanted to kill is finally dead. The tutor was silent, and suddenly a tiny burst of light flared, illuminating a small black-clad girl with a palm torch. The girl looked to be 15 or 16, both eyes blackened. Not unbeautiful, but just unhappy. Her forehead and cheeks were full of bruises, clear and distinct under the light. The hand controlling the palm torch was shaking, causing the flames to flicker. If it hadn't been confirmed earlier, no one would think this pale little girl was the Grand Tutor of Banyu. The flames in her hand illuminated herself and her surroundings. The ground next to her feet was piled with the armored corpses of Banyu soldiers. Xie Lian couldn't help but sneak a look beside himself. The torch in the tutor's hand was very small and did not light up the entire pit, so they were immersed in darkness. But using the little light, Xie Lian could see faintly that one next to him was dressed in red. It wasn't clear and he wasn't sure, but he could still somewhat distinguish what was close to him. San Lang was already taller than him, but now maybe he seemed taller than before. Xie Lian moved his eyes up, pausing at the neck, then continued upward, stopping at an elegantly shaped chin. San Lang's upper features were still hidden in the shadows, but Xie Lian thought the bottom half was distinctly different than before. Still handsome, but the lines were much more defined. Feeling he was being watched, San Lang tilted his head, and his lips curled upward slightly. Perhaps he wanted too much to get a better look, to get closer. Without realizing it, Xie Lian took a step closer to him. Just then, Keimo wailed in the distance, seeming to be shocked after seeing the bloody tragedy before him. Xie Lian abruptly snapped out of it and turned to look and saw Keimo was clutching his own head, but despite the general's cries, the Grand Tutor's expression remained wooden, and she only nodded. Good. In the midst of mourning, hearing those words made Keimo rage once more. Good? What's good? What do you mean? Good means we're finally freed, the tutor said. She turned to Xie Lian, who was still shrouded in the dark. Were you the one who killed them? That was an accident, Xie Lian replied. You're lying through your teeth, Keimo exclaimed. Xie Lian responded bold-facedly. Life is full of accidents. I love him so much. So busy being horny for his boyfriend and trying to avoid accusations of murder. The tutor gave him a look, but her expression was unreadable. Who are you? Her words were spoken in perfect Han dialect, and it wasn't said in an interrogative tone. I'm a heavenly official. This one here is my friend, Xie Lian replied. Keimo couldn't understand their words, but could tell they weren't fighting, and demanded, What are you saying? The tutor looked Xie Lian over, and eyed San Lang for a moment before quickly looking away. She said, We've never had heavenly officials visit before. I thought you had all already abandoned this place. Xie Lian had thought they would have to fight the tutor of Banyu, but was surprised to find she was this despondent, devoid of any will to fight. She spoke up again. Do you two want to leave? Of course we do, but there's an array set in the pit, so we can't, Xie Lian said. Hearing this, the tutor walked to one of the walls, raised her hand, and drew something. She turned around and said, There, I released the array. You two can leave now. This was way too easy. Xie Lian really didn't know what to say. Just then, a voice called from above. Hey, is anyone down there? If not, I'm leaving. It was Fu Yao's voice. Xie Lian heard San Lang tisk next to him and immediately looked up. There was a shadow of a man looking down into the pit. Xie Lian shouted, Fu Yao, there's people down here. I'm down here. After Xie Lian shouted, he also waved, and Fu Yao shouted back from above. You're actually down there? What's at the bottom besides you? A lot of things. Why don't you come down and see for yourself, Xie Lian said. Fu Yao probably thought the same, and blew a large ball of fire into the pit. In an instant, the entire sinner's pit was lit up bright like day, and Xie Lian finally saw clearly the kind of place he'd been standing in. All around him were bodies of bloody corpses piled high, innumerable bodies of Banyu soldiers stacked on top of each other, faces and limbs blackened, dark blood smearing bright armor. The corner of Xie Lian was standing by was the only spot in the entire sinner's pit that didn't have a dead body. This was all done in a flash, in the dark, by San Long after he jumped in. Xie Lian turned to look at the boy next to him. Before, in the dark, he thought San Long looked taller and was distinctly different in certain features. But now, under the bright firelight, the one standing next to him was the same handsome youth he'd known. When he saw Xie Lian look over, he grinned. Xie Lian looked down to check his wrists and boots, and both were the same as before, having nothing that would have caused that jingling sound. Just then, Xie Lian heard a muffled noise, the sound of Fu Yao jumping down. "Weren't you looking after the merchants?" Xie Lian asked. Having just entered the pit, Fu Yao wasn't yet used to the stench of blood and fanned his hand to make the airflow. He replied indifferently, "We waited for over 6 hours and there was no sign of you, so we figured something had happened. I drew a circle for them to wait in and came to check things out myself." Xie Lian frowned. "The circle won't last long. With you gone, what if they leave thinking you've left them behind?" Fu Yao shrugged. 8 horses can't stop a man who really wants to seek death. I can't stop stubborn people, so nothing. What's with those 2 over there? Who's who? Fu Yao was tense, ready to defend against the unknown, but soon discovered astonishingly that Keimo was already heavily wounded, barely able to stand, and the tutor of Banyu had her head lowered and was silent. That one is the general of Banyu, and the other one's the tutor of Banyu. Right now they're..." Keimo suddenly leapt up before Xie Lian could finish. He'd been lying on the ground gathering his strength and was finally able to jump up with a shout, aiming his fists at the tutor of Banyu, a large beefy warrior attacking a little girl. In the past, Xie Lian would have never allowed this sort of thing to happen before him. But Keimo had every reason to hate the tutor, and she could very well defend herself, yet she didn't, letting herself be thrown around like a broken rag doll. Keimo shouted at the tutor, "Where are your snakes? Come on, let them bite me to death too. Give me the release!" The tutor gloomily replied, "Keimo, my snakes don't listen to me anymore." "Then why don't they kill you?" he scoffed. "I'm sorry, Keimo," the tutor apologized. "Do you really hate us that much?" The tutor shook her head and Keimo became angrier. "You're going to be the death of me. If you don't hate us, why did you betray us, you shameless spy? Disgusting mole! You traitor!" Fu Yao watched him strike harder and harder. The blows were all one-sided, and he couldn't help but frown. What are they saying? Shouldn't we stop them? Xie Lian couldn't watch anymore either and rushed forward to stop Keimo. General, why don't you tell us who that Yong'an thug really is? Suddenly, the tutor grabbed his wrist. The grip was hard and came unexpectedly, and Xie Lian's heart dropped, thinking she was going to ambush him. But when he looked down at her, the tutor was on the ground, a small bruise at the corner of her mouth, her head raised, watching him intently. She didn't say a single word, but her dark eyes were intense with a flaming sense of life. This demeanor overlapped with an image from a far-gone memory. After a pause, Xie Lian blurted, "It's you." The tutor's voice also trembled. "General Hua?" This back and forth stunned everyone in the pit. Fu Yao rushed forward, knocked Keimo out with a punch, and demanded, "You two know each other?" Xie Lian didn't answer him. He knelt down, gripped the shoulders of the tutor, and examined her face. Earlier, they stood too far apart, and he couldn't see clearly. It had been over 200 years. The girl had matured in that time, and for many reasons, he didn't recognize her at first. But now that he looked again properly, it was the same face from his memories. Xie Lian couldn't speak for the longest time, and it was a good moment before he sighed. "Banyu." The tutor quickly clutched at his sleeves, and the gloomy face became alive with excitement. "It's me! General Hua, you still remember me?" "Of course I remember you, but..." Xie Lian gazed at her for a moment and sighed. "What have you done to yourself?" Hearing his words, her eyes suddenly filled with pain. "I'm sorry, Captain. I messed up," she muttered. In the exchange, it was General this, Captain that, making it glaringly obvious to the bystanders. Fu Yao was in shock. "Captain? General? You? How did this happen? Then the tomb of the general is..." "My tomb," Xie Lian replied. So, the tomb that they examined earlier, and were reading about the guy that accidentally died because he tripped in a battlefield, that was his tomb. He tried to help at this war, and wasn't able to, and humans thought he died, but of course, being a god, he didn't actually die, but they made him a little tomb. "Didn't you say you only came to collect junk here 200 years ago?" Fu Yao questioned. "This is a long story. That was originally the plan," Xie Lian answered. Around 200 years ago, due to some reasons, Xie Lian couldn't muck around in the east anymore and decided to stay out of sight for a while. He'd planned to cross the Qing Ridge and head to the south to start a brand new life of scraps. Thus, he took up his compass and walked southward. But the more he walked, the more he thought woefully, how come the scenery was all wrong? There should have been an abundance of trees and greenery, cities and crowds. So how come the path was so desolate? Suspicions aside, however, Xie Lian stubbornly continued on. He walked and came upon the Gobi Desert. It took a gust of wind blowing a fistful of sand into his face before Xie Lian finally realized his compass was broken. The direction it would guide him in the entire journey was wrong. Since there wasn't anything he could do about the whole thing, he might as well take the chance to visit the desert scenery, and continued walking. Only he changed course slightly, traveling northwestward, and finally arrived at the border where he settled, near the kingdom of Banyu. "At first I was just collecting junk around the area," Xie Lian said, "but the border was troubled, and with so many skirmishes there were often runaway soldiers, so the army would draft anyone to recruit to make up the numbers." "So you were forced into the army," San Long said. "Yeah," Xie Lian replied, "but doing anything at all was more or less the same, so it didn't matter to me. And then after chasing away some bandits a couple times, I got promoted to captain. The people would call me general, too." "Why did she call you General Hua?" Fu Yao questioned. "Your surname isn't Hua." Xie Lian waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about it. I randomly made up a fake name at the time. I think it was Hua Zi." Hearing the name, San Long's expression changed slightly, his lips twitching. San Long didn't pay attention and continued. "With a battle-torn border came many orphans. When I was free, I'd play with them sometimes. One of them was named Banyu. When there were bandits, Xie Lian was the bravest soldier, and no one dared block his way, nor did anyone dare to stand beside him. But when there weren't, it was as if anyone could order him around. One day he went and sat by a wall to start a campfire, using his own helmet to cook. As he cooked, the smell drifted out, and a few enraged soldiers came to kick over whatever it was. Xie Lian picked up his helmet with a broken heart, but when he looked back, he saw a small, disheveled, grimy child crouched behind him, picking up the stuff knocked to the ground with her hands, without caring whether it was too hot, stuffing it into her mouth. He was shocked. "Wait, don't! Little kid, you..." As expected, the little kid scarfed down a few lumps of the stuff she'd picked off the ground, then dry-heaved heavily, crying loudly. Xie Lian was so shaken, he picked her up, upside down, and ran laps until all the stuff she ate came out. After that was done, he crouched down and wiped away a seat for them. "Are you alright? I'm so sorry. Don't ever tell your parents about this, and next time don't pick up random stuff off the ground to eat." What are you doing now?" The child's face was covered in tears, but she still went back to pick off the ground again, still wanting to eat. It was only after Xie Lian grabbed her he realized the skin of the child's stomach was practically pressed to the back of her bones. When people starved to this point, they could eat anything, even if it was disgusting to the point of tears. Xie Lian had no choice and went back to bring her the last of his rations. Then afterwards he could always see this child stalking him in the shadows nearby. In his memories, the little girl Banyu was always gloomy, her body and face full of bruises, and when she looked at him, she would stare just so from below. Because she was singled out by the children of the Banyu kingdom, other than Xie Lian, there was only a Yong'an boy living at the border who sometimes paid attention to her. So she spent her days tagging along behind the two of them. She rarely spoke, but she was fluent in the Han dialect, so Xie Lian didn't know where she came from. But she was a random wandering child, so he randomly took her in. When he was free, he'd sometimes teach them songs, sometimes wrestle, sometimes show off his busker moves, and they got along quite well. Xie Lian shook his head. I had thought the Banyu in the title of the Grand Tutor was the country. I didn't realize it was actually her name. And then? Fu Yao asked. And then it's pretty much the same as what the memorial wrote, Xie Lian said. After some silence, San Long spoke up. The memorial said you died. On the subject of the memorial, Xie Lian felt quite bummed out. Weren't memorials usually praise and exaggerated good deeds to glorify the deceased? All those mentions of the demotions aside, why did it have to so solemnly record the embarrassing way he died? While they were hiding away from the sandstorm and he read this part, he could barely look at it straight on. If it wasn't for San Long, who also understood Banyu script and was watching him, he would have pretended that segment never existed. Having something like that written down, even he wanted to laugh at it, never mind other people. That he'd had the nerve to ask those seeking shelter in his memorial to not laugh as they commentated at his epitaph made him feel really bummed. Xie Lian's forehead was becoming red from all the rubbing. Oh, that. Of course I died. I didn't die. I faked it. Can Facebook and Twitch see the chat? They should be able to see what's on the screen. For some reason today, the multi-stream isn't showing YouTube. It's only showing Facebook, so I'm looking at the YouTube page. But it doesn't look like anybody's much on Facebook. Pablo seems to be both places, but I don't know why it's... I'm gonna have to look at the settings. It'll be a while before everything is going smoothly all the time, but anyway. Fu Yao had a face full of disbelief as Xie Lian explained himself. I got trampled on too hard and couldn't get up, so there wasn't any other way besides faking my death anyway. Truthfully, Xie Lian couldn't quite remember exactly how he died, nor why the battle broke out in the first place, only it was over something petty. He really didn't want to fight. Victory or defeat was meaningless. By then, his rank could go no lower and no one would listen to him. In the midst of battle, everyone saw red, so when he rushed out, it was blades and swords coming at him from both sides, cutting him down. Fu Yao questioned. It must be because you're an eyesore standing in the middle that you raised the ire of both sides. Otherwise, why would people cut you down when they saw you? Besides, I'm sure you know there were many who hated you, so why didn't you evade those people? Why did you have to charge in? I'm sure you could have dodged if you wanted to. So, the full story of how he first came to this place. He was actually living in the desert, recruited as a soldier, and tried to stop the fighting, got caught between the two of them, and trampled to almost basically death. Not really death because he's immortal, but so bad that all the humans thought he died. I guess they didn't bury him because, obviously he's not, underground, but he didn't have a very fun time here. But he knew the little girl who's supposed to be the tutor with all the dark magic who betrayed the kingdom and let the bad guys in. But we'll find out more about that next time because my voice is a little hoarse. That's not a fun place to stop at, but that's where the chapter ends. So thank you all for joining me. I'll be back with Alan Wake in about an hour. If you are a member, be sure to check out the members document. It was linked to an old version of the document, and I didn't realize it, so I've updated everything. It's new, so be sure to look at that. There's new videos, poetry readings, a couple of poems I've uploaded. I think there's about an hour of new members content available on the channel now. Tomorrow is another hangout day. We're gonna finish the past portion of The Untamed. I think there's like 4 episodes we gotta get through, so that'll be fun. Join the Discord if you want to do that. If you want to get members content for as little as 99 cents a month, you get access to hours of exclusive content, free copies of my books, ability to vote on what it is we stream and what we play, all kinds of stuff. Full link in the description to all my social media and membership stuff, Patreon stuff. Thanks again for watching, and we will continue this story, chapter 28, next week. So I will see you guys then. Bye.